has confirmed White House records that were improperly taken to Mar-a-Lago at the end of the Trump administration did in fact contain classified material. The former president returned 15 boxes of White House documents to the National Archives in January, and the agency now says it has, quote, identified items marked as classified national security information within the boxes. The National Archives has asked the Justice Department now to investigate. The former president released a statement Friday which reads in part, "If this was anyone but Trump, there would be no story here. Hillary Clinton would like a word." The National Archives also told members of Congress the Trump White House did not properly preserve records from some of its social media accounts, specifically deleted tweets and Snapchat posts from the president and several top aides. Joining us now, Washington Post national security reporter covering the Justice Department, Matt Zapotosky. Matt, thanks so much for being here with us. You've been on this story from the beginning, covering it closely. How significant a development is this, and what happens next to the former president?
We had reported about a week ago that there was classified information in these boxes, information that was in fact marked classified at the top secret level and above. So in some ways, this is just confirmation of what was already out there. But the public confirmation itself is significant because it's going to increase pressure on the FBI, on the Justice Department to say something and do something. When classified information slips out into the world, generally the FBI at a minimum wants to go and get that back, get that in sort of a secure facility, and also understand how did it get there. Look at it. They don't like classified information is just out in the world, as this was until several weeks ago. So the fact that the archives is now sort of saying on the record,
that is belied moving around, as you mentioned, from the
separatists, really ups the pressure on the FBI.
It really just goes to show that even as these interminable.
Matt, about that pressure on the FBI and the Justice Department, where are we on this? This seems like an endless investigation. We see stories in the papers each and every day, including the fine story today in the Washington Post. And yet there's a sense within the Justice Department among some people that things are proceeding too slowly, that there's not enough activity for the public to see someone basically in handcuffs as a result of this.
Well, I think there's sort of separate things you might be talking about. On the archives matter, we haven't really seen the Justice Department do anything. The archives, as we understand it, is going through and indexing these files. The Justice Department, at least as far as we understand it right now, hasn't opened any kind of investigation. I think sort of relatedly, just because we're talking about former President Trump, there is a lot of pressure on the Justice Department to investigate him for all manner of things. I think most notably that would be his comments on January 6th, his efforts to overturn the election. And you're right that there has been a lot of frustration generally on that the Justice Department isn't going right at members of his inner circle to learn details about this sort of pressure campaign or details about his sort of attitude or involvement with regard to his speech on January 6th. So those are kind of two separate things, the archives matter and then all of these other things, but they're of a point, which is that many people in the public, particularly on the left, are frustrated that the Justice Department just has been unwilling to investigate directly and aggressively the former president.
So, Kathy, there are two pieces to what the National Archives is saying here. Number one is that the records are incomplete, that they didn't get everything they needed from the White House. And number two, that he did, in fact, the president, take classified documents to Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, we've seen a pattern of the president, ripping up documents in the White House itself, which he shouldn't have been doing because White House documents are government records and they certainly shouldn't have been removed down to Mar-a-Lago. I guess the big question that a lot of people have is what's the cumulative impact of what the National Archives have just said about those documents going to Mar-a-Lago, about the investigations that are being held into the president and into his businesses as well. I mean, Jeremy, how much pressure, to Mike's point about this being broader than just this new information from the National Archives, how much legal jeopardy is Donald Trump in at the moment, given that there are these two grand juries in New York and in Georgia? Is he seriously facing the kind of legal consequences that many people in America think he perhaps should have faced a long time ago?
I don't think we have any idea, Kathy, and don't believe anybody who tells you they know, because Grand juries are by their design secret. And with respect to this latest issue, with respect to the classified information matter, ordinarily you'd think, yes, what DOJ would do is they would open a full field investigation. They would begin to subpoena records, gain access to documents, and interview witnesses. And this investigation probably would go on for a very long time. DOJ doesn't do anything in a matter of days or weeks. But whether or not there's a cumulative effect, I don't see that. I think these are running on separate tracks. I personally think the place where the Trump Organization faces the most legal liabilities with respect to the financial investigations that's being undertaken in New York. And as to whether or not anything ensues from the January 6th fake elector matter, I don't think DOJ has said a word. And I don't think sitting here today we have any idea whether that's going to result in criminal culpability for Donald Trump or his subordinates.
We'll see if the Justice Department moves on this one. Former Chief of Staff at the CIA and Department of Defense, Jeremy Bash, always good to see you, my friend. Thanks for being here. Washington Post national security reporter covering the Justice Department, who's been all over this story. Matt Zapotowski, thank you, too, for joining us. We appreciate it. Coming up here, a jury will...
I know him relatively well, and the conversation started off, I said, I know you and you know me. If I establish this occurred, then be prepared.
You said you know he doesn't have a soul.
I did say that to him, yes. And his response was, we understand one another. I wasn't being a wise guy. I was alone with him in his office. That's how it came about. It was when President Bush had said, I've looked in his eyes and saw a soul. I said, looked in your eyes, and I don't think you have a soul. And looked back at me and said, we understand each other. Look, most important thing dealing with foreign leaders, in my experience, and I've dealt with an awful lot of them over my career, is just know the other guy.
So you know Vladimir Putin. You think he's a killer?
I do.
That's President Biden, March of last year, calling Vladimir Putin a killer. As Putin now prepares for war with Ukraine, this morning, a possible new chance for diplomacy. We underline possible. Good morning. Welcome to Morning Joe. It is Monday, February 22nd, President's Day. I'm Willie Geist. Joe and Mika have the morning off. With us, MSNBC contributors Mike Barnicle and Caddy K on a busy President's Day Monday morning. Let's dive right in. In a last-ditch effort toward diplomacy, President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin have agreed in principle to a summit to discuss the ongoing crisis in Ukraine. The announcement was made late last night by the office of French President Emmanuel Macron after he spoke with both Biden and Putin separately. According to Macron's office, the two leaders have accepted the meeting, and it would take place only if an attack on Ukraine does not take place. But White House officials say a final decision on such a summit would be made only after further talks between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov, who are scheduled to meet on Thursday. In a statement, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki writes this, quote, "We are committed to pursuing diplomacy until the moment an invasion begins. We also are ready to impose swift and severe consequences should Russia instead choose war. Currently, Russia appears to be continuing preparations for a full-scale assault on Ukraine very soon," end quote. Amid these diplomatic efforts, the United States is warning it has credible information that Moscow is compiling lists of Ukrainians to be killed or sent to camps following a military occupation. That assertion was made recently in a letter by the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. The Kremlin says U.S. media reports that Russia has drawn up such lists is a, quote, absolute lie. This, as top U.S. officials yesterday echoed President Biden's assessment from Friday that Putin has made the decision to invade Ukraine within days, saying they've intelligence showing Russian military officials were given an order to invade. Here's Secretary Blinken on Meet the Press.
It certainly looks like everything we said was likely to occur in the lead up to the actual invasion is happening. We're seeing false flag operations taking place in eastern Ukraine, the manufacturing of provocations and justifications for Russia to go in. So all of this seems to be following the script that I laid out at the United Nations Security Council and that President Biden talked about to the nation just the other day.
As tensions escalate, President Biden yesterday held a rare weekend meeting of the National Security Council, conferring with top advisors, including Secretary Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Meanwhile, at the Munich Security Conference on Saturday, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky urged the United States and its allies to reveal their plans for sanctions against Russia to serve as a deterrent and warned about the dangers of appeasing the Russians. Russia continues to keep 30,000 troops in neighboring Belarus, meanwhile, despite earlier promises to withdraw them by Sunday. Satellite images released over the weekend suggest smaller Russian deployments, but also show they are continuing to move closer to the border with Ukraine. NBC News has not independently verified those images. We've got reports from both Russia and Ukraine this morning. NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons is in Moscow, and NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley is in Kharkiv, Ukraine, 25 miles from the Russian border. Good morning to you both. Matt, let me start with you there along the border in Ukraine. What is the feeling right now about whether this may be imminent, despite all the talks and the potential for this summit between Biden and Putin, which still is a long way off? What is the feeling among Ukrainian people on the ground and Ukrainian officials about whether and when this may happen?
Yeah, I mean, Willie, it's a good question and something I've been talking about ever since I got here a month ago. It's really remarkable, the massive disconnect between what we're hearing internationally from Washington and what we're seeing on the ground. Yesterday at this hotel where I'm standing, and again, 25 miles from the border, there was a massive children's dancing competition in the hotel. So about 700 children from all over Ukraine, their parents felt like they could drive them to within 25 miles of the border with Russia, and they felt confident about it. And, you know, it's really interesting because the fact is, you know, is this hubris? Is this defiance? No, I mean, they're just used to it. This is a war that's been going on for 8 years, and Ukrainians feel as though the threat has always been there and it's never gone away. But that is belied by the facts on the ground here. Just across the border, there are a huge number of armaments that are moving around. We're starting to see tanks, mobile howitzers, fighter jets, and helicopters that are arrayed just across the border. And that was, as you mentioned, from Maxar Technologies, which has been tracking this from the beginning. We're also starting to see from Maxar and other groups who are monitoring the movement of some of these armaments from their more permanent positions, from their staging areas, into what looks like a battle preparation mode. And that's also been very threatening. So the government here is sounding the alarm on that. Also, to the east of where I am, in those two separatist enclaves that are Russian-backed, we're starting to see a real uptick in the tempo of fighting. We're starting to see a massive exchange of fire between these Russian-backed separatists and Ukrainian regular military. Two Ukrainian soldiers were killed just over the weekend, and there's been dozens of incidents, sort of violations of the terms of ceasefires that have been recorded every single day, and that number is increasing. I expect that we're going to start to see more and more of that as this week goes on. You know, I was speaking to a Ukrainian diplomat a couple of weeks ago, and he told me, you know, as long as the diplomats are talking, the guns are silent. But the fact is, Willie, that as long as the diplomats are talking, the guns are moving. They're moving into place. They're trundling all around the border. You could practically hear them from where I am. And it really means that, you know, it really just goes to show that even as these, you know, interminable discussions keep going on and on, Vladimir Putin is moving guns into position for a potential invasion. And we can see that from the satellites. It's very clear. Willie?
Yeah, Matt, I saw that video you posted to social media yesterday. It was extraordinary. A children's dancing competition with parents cheering them on like it was any other Sunday. And yet there are 130,000 Russian troops just over the border, potentially poised to roll in. Keir, let's talk about the Russian side of this. President Macron came out yesterday and said, yes, I've laid the groundwork for a summit between Putin and Biden contingent on Russia not going into Ukraine. The White House poured a little bit of cold water on that, saying, well, let's see. We've got to let Blinken and Lavrov talk first, and then maybe there'll be a summit down the road. There is a sense that Putin's playing games here. What's your sense of it?
Well, Willie, I think diplomatically speaking, when you heard Matt there talk about the changes on the ground in detail, the daily changes, diplomatically speaking, nothing's really changed, and that's the issue. Those negotiations that President Macron is trying to push, I guess they can delay things. Certainly, we may see a delay until Secretary Blinken and Minister Lavrov meet later this week. If they indeed do meet, maybe there'll be a delay until President Putin and President Biden can meet. But the reality is that fundamentally, the Ukrainian government isn't going to start implementing Minsk. And the Russians have been building dollar reserves for years and years, going back to President Putin's famous speech in Munich. They now have $630 billion more than in reserves. And when you look at that, that pretty much tells you that President Putin has been preparing for this day for many, many years. And why I say that is because when the Secretary of State on Meet the Press yesterday talks about massive sanctions, to put it in a visceral sense, fundamentally, President Putin isn't frightened. He's not frightened because his inner circle are already sanctioned. They can't leave Russia. He's not frightened because he has those reserves. And I think he's not frightened too because he knows that potentially his next moves down the line might be to cut off the gas to Russia, cut off the gas to Germany, causing panic in Germany, maybe some kind of a massive cyber attack. And that really explains why there is such a huge risk here, because, of course, once conflict starts, you don't know what direction it may go in. So, of course, it's important that there continues to be efforts for diplomatic talks, but we really are in the last chance saloon, I think.
Paris, Caddy, you are in Paris this morning, and President Macron yesterday really served as sort of a mediator. He spoke to President Biden. He spoke to President Putin twice yesterday, both before and after his call with President Biden. And again, laid the groundwork, didn't set up a summit yet, but laid the groundwork for a possible meeting between the two. How realistic does that look to you from where we're sitting this morning?
You know, it's interesting, Willie, there's a strong push here in Europe, and I've been here for a couple of weeks, to really see diplomacy as far as it will go, to not accept the idea that an invasion is inevitable. And I think that was why we saw President Macron on the phone with Vladimir Putin for a couple of hours, then on the phone with Joe Biden, then back on the phone with Vladimir Putin last night, trying to arrange this summit in order to give diplomacy a chance. And we've just heard that the German Chancellor is also going to speak to President Putin this afternoon, again, trying to present a coordinated effort between Western allies, showing that this is not just President Macron going out on a limb. The French want to make it clear that there's the Germans, the Brits, the Americans, and the French in this effort to try and give diplomacy a chance. But, you know, Keir's right. The signs from the Kremlin are not good this morning. They fairly quickly threw cold water on the prospects, realistic prospects, of an imminent summit between Joe Biden and Vladimir Putin, and all the signs on the ground are that things are moving in a military direction. I mean, it'd be interesting to hear from Matt. You know, Matt, we're watching things change. I mean, we've got these fascinating satellite images, fascinating social media images that we're seeing from the ground there. What's going to be the trigger that you look for to tell us that we've got beyond kind of movement of troops towards an invasion and something that is actually a war in Ukraine, beyond the war we've had since 2014?
It's a good question. Definitely that casus belli, if you will, the pretext that is almost certainly going to be happening in the east of the country, in those two Russian-backed separatist enclaves. That is what Anthony Blinken was warning about. He was saying that, you know, basically everything that he had predicted is starting to look like it's true. These exchanges of fire are really very ominous and threatening. You know, the Ukrainian regular military, they're under strict orders not to return fire unless it's absolutely necessary, because all they have to do is start killing some of these Russian separatists, and then that will give Vladimir Putin his pretext to invade. Now, Vladimir Putin has already said time and time again that the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine is oppressed. They're even the victims of genocide. He said that in just the past week or two. So either he believes that, which I find hard to believe because we were out there and saw no evidence of anything like a genocide, or he just believes that the Russian-speaking people of eastern Ukraine will rise up and back his army, as they have in the eastern part of the country. I'm in Kharkiv, which is a Russian-speaking city. People here, their ordinary conversations are in Russian, not in Ukrainian. These people are not united behind Vladimir Putin. I mean, some certainly are, but the vast majority of them support the government in Kyiv. And so if Vladimir Putin believes that he will get support just because they're Russian speakers, I think he's mistaken.
Keir, I understand that this is a difficult question I'm about to ask you. You are not permanently posted in Moscow, but you're certainly familiar with Moscow. You've been there several times, and you have sources in Moscow. Do you get any sense at all that Putin of being isolated from reality, isolated from former advisors that used to see him more often than they see him now, and most importantly, the tenor, the tone of the Russian people about this pending war that Russia seems to be about to undertake?
Well, I think your question about the Russian people, the Russian media just in the past few days has shifted more towards, you could call it, a war footing. So there's clearly an effort to persuade the Russian people that what might be about to happen should happen. Then in terms of the question about President Putin, listen, the coronavirus has had an impact on his contact with a wider community, if you like. I was talking just a few days ago to an advisor to an oligarch who was saying that where in the past President Putin might have seen this oligarch, once a week, maybe every few weeks, doesn't happen anymore. And then there is a very small coterie of advisors around President Putin, and we're talking about a handful, who he is able to talk to on secure lines. And these are almost all of them former KGB, and they are very hard line in the main, and they are the people that are advising with him, are strategizing with him. So yes, in a sense he is isolated. Certainly I think his view could be limited. It could be that there are aspects of things that he doesn't understand. But that being said, I think we do have to be cold-eyed about this. For example, when President Putin made the moves he made in relation to Syria many years ago, many in the West said, that's not going to work, that's going to be a quagmire for him, it's going to be a disaster, and it wasn't. So I don't think we should underestimate the extent to which President Putin and the team around him are looking at the overall situation, making an assessment, making a judgment, and from their perspective, from their logic, they may have some things right. Again, though, and this is really crucial, if we do head into a conflict, into a war, well, war is unpredictable. And no one, Vladimir Putin, President Biden, no one has the ability to say exactly how it plays out.
Great perspective this morning from Keir Simmons in Moscow, Matt Bradley in Kharkiv, Ukraine, 25 miles from the Russian border. Thank you both so much. We appreciate it. China, meanwhile, paying close attention to the situation in Ukraine as it cements closer ties with Russia. The New York Times reports it this way. Current and former U.S. and European officials say they are alarmed over what is effectively a non-aggression pact between China and Russia that could amount to a realignment of the world order. You remember Vladimir Putin made a great show of attending the opening ceremony in Beijing a couple of weeks ago. Joining us now, former Chief of Staff at the CIA, Department of Defense, NBC News national security analyst Jeremy Bash. Jeremy, good morning. You are just back from that Munich security conference where President Zelensky of Ukraine effectively admonished the West and said, you are appeasing Russia. Don't do it again. You've done it in the past. You did it in 2014. Look where it got us. Don't do it again. Looking for a more aggressive stance from the West on things like sanctions. What were your impressions being there, and how close do you think Russia and Ukraine are to war this morning?
Well, Willie, at the conference, there was an eerie feeling because Vladimir Zelensky, as you noted, he left his country, his home country, basically staring down the barrel of a Russian military invasion. And he said, I'm going to have breakfast in my country. I'm coming to this conference in Germany, and then I'm going to have dinner in my country. And people were nervous whether he'd actually get back into Kiev, whether Russia could potentially stage a military assault while he was away. So everybody breathed a sigh of relief when they got news late that evening that he had gone home. I think his presentation showcased a nervousness, a concern, a deep concern about the Russian military invasion that's pending. Obviously, at that point, President Biden had already announced to the world that Putin had already made the decision to invade, that he had given the order to invade to his forces. And Zelensky said, look, I need help. I need help from NATO. I need your backing. I need your financial backing. Don't abandon Ukraine. And that was the overriding message. And it was a message of unity at this Munich Security Conference, Willie. And in some ways, I've been going to this conference for many, many years. I've never seen so much unity, so much sense of purpose from the Western allies.
So, Jeremy, we've been hearing now for well over a week that an attack is imminent, that the invasion by Putin into Ukraine is imminent. President Biden said it again a couple of days ago. We heard it again from Secretary of State Blinken. We're getting these new reports that NBC now has confirmed the Washington Post report about a potential kill list of Ukrainians if Russia does go in. We've seen the satellite imagery of the troops on the border. Do you believe this is a fait accompli? Is Putin definitely going into Ukraine one way or another?
Look, I think the intelligence that President Biden announced to the world is obviously accurate, which is that President Putin has made the decision to invade Ukraine. Now, what I don't think we know with absolute precision is the extent to which the invasion will push all the way to the major cities, including to Kiev, the capital. And we don't know exactly precisely the timing. And of course, that's a tactical decision that Putin will make with his military commanders. Do I think it's reversible? Unlikely, but I got to give the Biden administration credit because their position is, hey, we'll talk to you as long as there's no invasion. If there's an invasion, we're not going to validate your invasion by summitry.
Yeah, Blinken and Lavrov meet on Thursday. We'll see if they make it that long without an invasion. Jeremy, stay with us. Much more to talk about with you on